From the air, football pitches look so peaceful. Places where people gather to run, kick, sweat, laugh and drink, shout and fight. Every week somewhere, punches are thrown between fans and players of opposing teams. Big dreams are shared and fought over on these pitches. But on the 29th of May 1985, those dreams turned into a deadly nightmare. And this stadium in Belgium, since rebuilt, became a battlefield. Three-quarters of an hour before the European Cup final between Liverpool and Juventus, broadcast live all over Europe, 38 fans were trampled to death in a corner of the terraces called Block Z. A 39th victim died in hospital 3 months later. The majority of the people who died were Italian. 2 were French, 4 Belgian, 1 came from Northern Ireland. But the fact that close to 40 fans had lost their lives was not enough to stop the match going ahead. Within little more than 2 hours of the deaths, the 1985 European Cup final was played regardless. Tonight, we return to Heysel, where choices were made that still haunt people 20 years on. Mrs. Martelli lost her son Franco at Heysel. For 20 years she's been visiting his grave every day. Franco and his mother both loved football, and so she's tried to keep that love alive.
We don't go to watch football matches anymore, mostly because at my age I couldn't cope with being in the middle of all those people in the stadium. When I watch the game on TV, I'm always nervous. Then when I see them score, I cheer. I'm all happy. It's as if I were Franco. He's always with me. Who knows what he'd do now when Juventus scores. When they lose, I'm sad.
3 years after the tragedy, there was a trial to establish who was responsible for the deaths of 39 people. In the end, a Belgian gendarmerie officer and 2 of the organisers were convicted, but the main culprits, it was decided, were 14 Englishmen. Terry Wilson, now a swimming pool lifeguard, received one of the heaviest sentences, 5 years in prison for manslaughter.
I was working in the fruit market at the time, so I was starting work at 2 o'clock in the morning, and about 7 o'clock, policemen came in. I was on my forklift, and policemen came in and approached me and were like, are you Terry Wilson? I was like, yeah. And he came up to me and said, we're arresting you for the manslaughter of Mario Ronchi and 38 others. And to be honest, I just laughed at them. I was like, don't be stupid. Manslaughter? All I did was run over, throw a few fists, help our fans out, and manslaughter.
Today, Terry Wilson is a born-again Christian. He's made it his mission to stop others making the mistakes he made.
Name's Terry. Nice one. Thanks very much for coming. You all look lovely. What I'm going to do first, okay, is just tell you a little story out of the Bible. And what I'm going to do is bring my life into it.
Terry served 9 months of his 5-year sentence for manslaughter. 20 years on, he feels he's found his forgiveness.
Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. In the law, Moses commands us to stone such women. Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. If any of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her.
In total, 39 people died at the Heysel. Among them were 2 postmen, 2 cooks, 3 doctors, 4 students, 1 car mechanic, a soldier, a schoolboy, a school janitor, a farmer, a taxi driver, several shopkeepers, a fashion photographer, and a builder, Domenico, the cousin of these 2 builders in Milan. Armando and Danilo Ragazzi were in their early 20s when they went to Heysel. They loved Juventus, as did their cousin Domenico.
From the moment I was born and learned that a football was black and white, I've been black and white.
Black and white are the colours of Juventus, which has supporters all over Italy. Armando Ragazzi's son Gianpaolo dreams of becoming the next Juventus goalkeeper. In '85, Stefano Tacconi was the Juventus goalkeeper. The evening badly scarred him, but he too once had big dreams about football.
I spent my childhood with friends running around in a field. And even then I was passionate about football because my older brothers played. And of course, whatever they did, I had to do.
My son's even worse than me. He even cries. I've never cried. He cries whenever they lose.
Once Juventus reached the final, our minds were made up. There was no question about it. We had to go. That was that.
There might have been 20 of us. Everyone was saying, I'm going to go. In the end, to be safe, I bought 4 tickets.
Everyone said, I want to go, I want to go.
I came back to the village and the only people I could find to come were Armando and Danilo. I couldn't find anyone to take the 4th ticket.
We went to the bar and along came my cousin, Domenico.
20 years after the tragedy, the 3 builders have agreed to return to Brussels. Taking Domenico's place is Armando's goalkeeping son, Gianpaolo.
It was a fantastic journey, even though we got hopelessly lost in the middle of Germany. We had no idea how to order boiled eggs. We ended up drawing a chicken on the table.
From all over Europe, fans travelled to Brussels to see Juventus and Liverpool play for the 1985 European Cup. 60,000 people, 60,000 individual stories, some of which we retrace tonight. Terry Wilson agreed to travel back, as did British Transport Police officer Ian McGregor.
At that time, I was the Assistant Chief Constable in the British Transport Police. It was my responsibility to ensure that on all continental football matches, that all information and intelligence was passed to the relevant police forces, consulates and other agencies abroad. I have got to be honest to say I had no concerns. The shipping companies and the captains were most helpful, and indeed they controlled the bars and ensured that there was no alcohol sold on the ships. We had full policing powers until such time as the ferry docked. We then became private citizens. We took our uniforms off, we put them in a bag, and we travelled forward on the special trains in plain clothes.
From that moment onwards, if something happened, Ian McGregor was going to have to act without any official policing powers. It was early in the morning of Wednesday the 29th of May, 1985. Former karate champion Tony Chin was the Liverpool Football Club bodyguard. This is the hotel his team stayed in. 20 years on, Tony Chin and Bruce Grobbelaar found its rooms and corridors unchanged. Liverpool felt relaxed. The year before, in 1984, the club had played the European Cup final as well. Bruce Grobbelaar played a defining role in the penalty shootout that decided the game.
There's our friend Bruce Grobbelaar again. Grobbelaar, antics on the line.
Do you think that generally distracted him?
I think so. Good boy.
Yeah, well, it didn't it, obviously.
So Liverpool 3-2 up. Liverpool are European champions! What joy!
After the cup was won, I was given the cup, taken back to the hotel and locked in the room. I opened the bathroom door, put the cup down, had a full shower, looking at the cup.
The cup is about the same size as Tony as well.
It was electrifying, you know, the European Cup in my hands.
I just remember when we got back to Liverpool, back to the airport, doors came open and off we came with the cup. It was surreal, really, because there were thousands and thousands of supporters all sort of waiting for us and cheering and everything, and we're all sort of coming off, stumbling off and saying, oh, just pretend you're not drunk and all that kind of thing. But we were, to a man, woman, child, well, not to a child, obviously, but we were all completely drunk. And not just drunk on alcohol, drunk on sort of life, success, victory, you name it.
The European Cup is the biggest trophy any club team can win, and Liverpool had won it several times. Their opponents in 1985, Juventus, never.
We'd won
the UEFA Cup 2 or 3 times and the Cup Winners' Cup about the same number of times. But that one was missing from the club's trophy cabinet, from Juventus's CV.
sportivo della società di Juventus.
Armando, Danilo, Guido and Domenico drove all night from Italy to Brussels, and they started their day with breakfast in a cafe opposite the Heysel Stadium. They were full of confidence.
All day long in the run-up to the game, we were talking about what might happen, who would win, who would score, would so-and-so score, would Platini score.
Anyone can lose, but we were the much better team.
Yeah, there was the odd drunk fan, but there were Italians drinking too. We were all playing football together, swapping our scarves and pennants.
I swapped my scarf. I gave mine to a Liverpool fan and he gave me his.
We'd said, don't worry if you can't call, we'll understand. But he did call. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. He told us that he'd got to know lots of Liverpool fans. He'd made friends with them. He told us that they were really nice guys.
The Heysel Stadium on the outskirts of the Belgian capital was completely rebuilt after the disaster, but the layout has remained the same, with a track around the pitch and the same gate next to Block Z, where 39 people died, all recognisable to those coming back, like marketing man Keith Cooper.
In 1985, I was working for the company ISL, sports marketing company, And we were responsible at that time for all the sponsorship in and around, amongst other things, the European Cup finals, which at that time still meant primarily, in sponsorship terms, the installation of the advertising boards around the pitch, to make sure with my colleagues that these boards were in place for the maximum exposure on television during the game.
Guy van Biesen was the head of the stadium workers.
We were obviously very concerned to make sure all aspects of the stadium, the pitch, the lines, the loudspeakers and the PA system were in perfect condition. Especially since the game was going to be televised across Europe, possibly even worldwide.
Marcel Roosens was responsible for the VIPs.
I've seen the king here. I've seen princes, ministers and mayors. It was my job to welcome them and to give them a little card with their VIP seat number and to show them to their seat.
At 11 o'clock, the organisers of the final were invited to a reception in Brussels Town Hall, followed by lunch in a nearby restaurant. Marketing man Keith Cooper joined them there, feeling slightly uneasy about what he'd seen in the stadium.
We worked in the stadium during the morning, and I came back to the reception in the town centre for midday. It was normal on a European Cup final day for all the bigwigs from UEFA, from the local organising committee, from the city and so on to be here. Most of those gentlemen had no professional responsibilities on the day. Some of them did, of course, but most of them were here for the game, as is their right. So it was a pleasant social occasion. Everything was looking good, although it was during this reception that I began to express certain concerns about what might happen. During the course of our work, we noticed that there was a lot of loose stones and loose rubble lying around. So I brought along one of these stones, about the size of a cricket ball, rough, jagged edges. And it seemed to me a little bit negligent that greater care had not been taken in the preparation of the stadium to make sure that kind of stuff was not lying around.
It was midday. Alessandro Antonini and his friend Fausto Moschini were looking forward to the final. It was beautiful sunny weather, and with their wives they were enjoying a wander around the centre of town.
Fausto and I had been away together before, but that was the first time we'd been to a football match together. He really wasn't as much of a Juventus fan as I was. I tried to make him understand that it's one thing to watch a game on television, but quite another to experience it live in the stadium.
It's important for me that people are made aware of the fact that we went there to support a team, to watch a football game, and had, up until the incidents, had an unbelievable, a fantastic day with the Italians.
Huguette Bruant, the daughter of the mayor of Brussels at the time, accompanied her father to the stadium after he'd picked her up from home at about 5.
In the late afternoon, I did my makeup and got dressed up because it was a really big evening for me. I was only 25 then. When my father came home from the city hall, he told my mother and me there had already been incidents in town.
Huguette, her father and the other VIPs were received in a big hall underneath the stadium grandstand.
I remember that I wanted to see the European Cup close up. It's not every day you can get right up close and touch it. I went into the grandstand with my parents and I touched the cup. Immediately my mother said to me, "Be careful, don't damage it."
The stadium gates opened at 5 o'clock, more than 3 hours before kick-off. The ragazzis were among the first to enter. Their cousin Domenico wasn't very tall, and he went down to the front of the terraces to get a better view. It took some pushing and shoving to get in.
I was a little worried, not because of the Liverpool fans, but because of some of our own. The entry to the stadium was through a tiny door, and people were jostling to get in ahead of the crowd.
When you're on the terraces, you live and breathe the game. You're not sat like an Egyptian mummy in silence, worried that you might disturb other people. I have to live every minute of the game, otherwise what's the point in being there?
The south side of the Heysel Stadium was reserved for Italian fans. The terraces on the opposite north side filled up with English fans, and right next to them, separated by this flimsy fence, was a block reserved for neutral supporters, Block Z. This is the block the ragazzis had tickets for. Entering the stadium was a rather chaotic affair. Fans from both sides tried to get in any way they could. Mrs. Martelli's son Franco was also in Block Z. When, after 20 years, Alessandro and his wife Tiziana, Fausto and his wife Antonella returned to Heysel, they find it filled with ghosts. Back then, the stadium didn't look as pristine as today.
There were loose bits of cement, soil and sand on the ground. The stadium was falling apart at the seams. But you get carried away by the euphoria, and we decided to stay.
When the scuffles first started, they were worried and said, "Don't you think this is dangerous? Surely we should get out of here." But I had been to more matches than they had and was less concerned by what was happening. I tried to reassure them, saying, No, this is what fans usually do. You'll see. It'll all come down soon."
You know, of course, that the hooligans have this bad reputation, but you can't help believing that they won't live up to that reputation, that in the end they'll behave properly.
We talked about where we should stand, down near the front where you could get a better view, or further up where it was a little less crowded. That's where I went. After a couple of minutes, the others all came up to where I was. That's what saved us all.
Very quickly, the stadium filled up with Liverpool fans, but most of all with Juventus supporters, who seemed to dominate the ground.
I just wasn't prepared for what I saw. I've been to football matches at Wembley, Liverpool, Glasgow, but I have never seen anything like this. The atmosphere was electric. There were banners, there was colours, there was drums beating, and massive cries going up from the crowd of Juve, Juve. They had taken over the ground completely. I looked round behind me, which was the Liverpool end. Within England, they were the dominant people. They stamped their authority when it came to noise and singing. But here, they weren't in it. I mean, the Italians had just dominated the whole event.
"6:15, 2 hours before kick-off. The Juventus players had now arrived at the stadium as well.
We were sure we were going to win the match because we were a great team. Of course, we were playing one of the best teams in the world, but we felt they were coming to the end of their era at the top, and ours was just getting started.
The Liverpool players, of course, were not planning to let that happen.
one with the bruises, no sprout. Big one at the back.
We didn't feel so much adrenaline until we got about here.
Then we came over, getting the buzz.
And then we got the buzz, yeah, because our fans were all here.
I was just all over, all over, buzzing all over.
You gave them a big clap and
the noise was pushing you back, wasn't it?
And it was brilliant. Yeah. And it was just in this corner there where all the fans were.
While the players were leaving the pitch, the first real troubles began by the fence between the Liverpool fans and Block Z. It was 6:30. A combination of factors turned a potentially minor incident into a disaster. The flimsiness of the fence, the dilapidated state of the terraces where big stones were easy to pick up, the lack of training of the security forces on duty. The Pope had visited Belgium earlier that month, and many experienced officers were on leave. It all proved a deadly mix. Commander Robert Bernard was the head of the gendarmerie at the time.
The Belgian gendarmerie had specially trained units to maintain public order, but they had done a great deal of overtime during the Pope's visit earlier that month. The squadron with responsibility for Block Z was what we would call a third-class squadron, what the French would call the bottom of the basket. The squadron was made up of older gendarmes who had much less training. And of course that was the squadron stationed by Block Z, right where the tragic events unfolded.
Terry Wilson always claimed he simply reacted to Italian aggression towards Liverpool supporters inside Block Z. 20 years later, he stands by that story.
No one wanted any trouble, so it was great. And then as we were in there singing and that, our attention was being drawn to things that were happening in Z section.
Was a young lad wearing a Liverpool shirt. He was between 8 and 12 years old, and he was just getting destroyed by Italian men.
We did get pretty angry from the point of what's going on, who are these people fighting here, why are they fighting? So the reaction, our immediate reaction, was pull the fence down, get over there to the assistance of our supporters.
So it was one of them. Either we stay there and let the Italians, really batter the Liverpool fans, or go over there, try and help them do something about it.
Several waves of Liverpool fans chased the Juventus fans in Block Z. Some ran onto the far end of their terrace. Others escaped onto the track around the pitch. The gendarmes fled with them. A day of celebrations was fast unravelling. In their panic, a big number of Italians had run towards the farthest lower corner of Block Z, where they packed up against a wall and started trampling on each other. Armando, Danilo, Guido and Domenico were in the thick of it. The danger of the situation was just starting to dawn on them.
After just a couple of minutes, I felt my trainers slip off, sucked right off my feet. I realized I was barefoot. My feet weren't even touching the ground.
Your shoes don't just come off for no reason. We were packed in so tightly together, like sardines, you couldn't move a muscle. That's how it was. You didn't even have the time to think.
You don't think about anything in that situation. I couldn't think about anything. You just think everyone's going to spread out soon and everything will get back to normal.
7:30, 3/4 of an hour before the scheduled kick-off time. Back in Italy, Mrs. Martelli, a school teacher, was attending a meeting about the end-of-year exams.
All of a sudden, at about 7:30, something came over me. I couldn't breathe. And yet the window was open. There was plenty of fresh air. But I didn't feel well. So I got up. My colleague behind me grabbed my jacket and said, "What are you doing, Martelli?" The principal is still speaking.
Social worker Martine Bolu was on standby duty at the fire brigade headquarters when the unexpected news came in. She wrote a diary about the night as a kind of therapy, and she told us that until now she'd never reread it.
At 7:30, no one rushed to answer the phone. We were used to hearing it ring around the clock for all sorts of reasons, depending on who was calling. Finally, Chris got up, not out of a particular desire, but simply because she was the person sitting closest to the door. And unexpectedly she screams. She repeats herself once, twice, 3 times. She says, but that's impossible. We all say the same thing. It must be a joke. We ask if she's sure. See for yourselves, she says. Just turn on the radio, the television.
7:31 and 20 seconds is when the emergency service radio first reported that a wall had collapsed. A man with a yellow shirt frantically tries to help. He's a Liverpool fan. He wouldn't be interviewed because the memories are too painful. Contrary to what was assumed that night, and what is often still assumed, it wasn't the collapse of the wall that caused the 39 deaths. The collapse actually released pressure and allowed fans trapped up against the wall to escape. The dead died from suffocation. They lost their balance in the pushing and shoving, fell, and were trampled by the others.
Just human beings just come over like water, unbroken, and thuds, just thuds. They made a noise, but you know, it's just a quiet noise, but the screaming.
Seconds seemed like hours, while the disorganised police and gendarmerie struggled to intervene in any coherent way.
I held my wife's hand as long as I could, and then at a certain point I realized I wasn't holding it anymore, and I was lying on the ground.
I was stuck under there for 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes. I couldn't tell you exactly, because the minutes felt like an eternity. I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. I'd lost my glasses, so my vision was blurred, and I couldn't really see anything. In those moments, many things passed through my mind. The only thing I remember thinking was, I've come to Brussels to die for the sake of a football match.
50 metres from Block Z, in the VIP hall, a reception was underway. Marcel Roosens and his VIPs were totally unaware of what was happening.
A couple of minutes before the game was due to start, a whole group of guests from the European Union still hadn't arrived. But everything seemed fairly normal. although of course it was very noisy outside. At a certain point I went out, wondering whether these EU people would ever turn up. I saw 3 or 4 cars arrive. I thought, there they are. But they had barely pulled up when they left again. I couldn't understand what was happening. And just then, people started to come running down the stairs, from the grandstand into this hall. People I didn't recognize. They were fleeing from Block Z.
The chaos on the terraces was spreading. Fans from Block Z burst into the VIP hall. The Italian minister Gianni De Michelis saw it happening.
I remember we drove in. Everything seemed normal. The car stopped right in front of the entrance to the VIP hall. I got out. Suddenly a crowd of people came running towards me. They stopped me, shouting, "Minister, help us." It was just awful. There were a lot of them, traumatized, and some covered in blood.
All evening it was as though I was someone else watching myself. I felt like I was watching a disaster movie.
At the time, I was Vice President of the European Commission. I was invited to the European Cup final, and I in turn had invited Henry Kissinger, the former American Secretary of State. I immediately phoned him from my car to say, "Listen, there's going to be a delay. You should wait in the hotel until I phone you again."
Etienne d'Avignon was the owner of one of the very first mobile phones, a car phone. In the stadium, just a few fixed telephone lines were available. On top of this, the police and the gendarmerie radios weren't working properly. The lack of communication added to the confusion.
A few minutes afterwards, some police officers came and told my father that there were already people dead in Block Z. And so the two of them went straight to Block Z to see what was happening.
The mayor was standing next to me and I was thinking, what's going to happen now? What are we going to do? If the Italians learn what's happened, how will they react and what will the English do then? We had to make sure that people stayed where they were. I'm not sure, but I think the mayor said at that point that we'd have to cancel the whole event.
A group of gendarmes managed to push the English fans back out of Block Z. Their orders came from outside the grounds. There was no command centre inside the stadium. In the meantime, many of the Italian fans behind them still struggled to escape.
I tried to escape, but seeing as my feet weren't even touching the ground, I couldn't, and I fell. But I heard someone say, "They're charging again." And in my desperation, I grabbed the wall and dragged myself over it, without even looking. There could have been a 50-metre drop the other side for all I knew. I threw myself over regardless.
Sono girato, sono andato su sulle scale, qui così, qui c'era già tutto casino, tutta gente per terra, e qui c'era il muro, no? Qui c'era il muro alto, di 2 metri, e io ho cercato di attaccarmi, fermati qua, sono cercato di attaccarmi, mi sono riuscito a attaccare e poi mi sono buttato giù di là.
Alto quasi.
No, era 2 metri, 2,50.
I was crying, I think from the fear, what I'd been through. I felt like I had a fever. It was all overwhelming. But because you have to, you manage to pull yourself together. I thought, where's Danilo? Where's Amanda? Where's Domenico?
Guido, Armando and Danilo managed to escape, but without their cousin Domenico. They had to try to find him. But where?
I saw the violence, the frightening scenes on television. I asked Filippo, have you changed the channel? I'm seeing pictures which are nothing to do with Juventus, which can't be coming from Brussels. My son got up and went to have a look. He turned pale and said, come and see, come and see. It is the stadium. My heart started racing. My husband and I were standing next to each other. I fell to my knees. I thought I would die.
Alessandro Antonini's wife was lying trampled on the terraces. His friend Fausto thought she was dead. But Alessandro decided not to give up just yet.
I got up and looked round. My wife lay 2 meters away. Together with a policeman, I picked her up. I held her legs and he held her arms, and we carried her down towards the dressing rooms. Right then, an ambulance arrived, and we put her in it. I remember that as we were leaving in the ambulance, an English fan with a bleeding wound on his leg tried to get the ambulance to stop. I grabbed the driver by the throat and said, if you stop, I'll kill you.
I'm driving the car. My colleagues put on their uniforms, yellow jackets. They prepare their notepads and pens, their pages, go over the list of hospitals. We pass through 3 checkpoints. At first, we don't see anything unusual. But then comes the shock and disgust. We want to throw up and run away, to go back 5 seconds in time, 5 seconds so that we never have to see those scenes that will haunt us forever.
Et ne pas revoir la scène qui restera à jamais ancrée dans nos mémoires. Il y a encore celui-ci. Il y a encore.
Have you seen that footage before? No, that footage, no. No, I've never seen this before.
Those trapped in the crowd had no choice but to try to escape and survive. But the bystanders had a decision to make. Players, officials, press, cameramen. Should they continue with their work or try to intervene? Most European TV channels began their live broadcast of the final at 8 o'clock that evening. Instead of commenting on a football game, reporters found themselves giving out the death toll. Italian commentators were begged to broadcast the names of fans who wanted to let their family know that they were all right. Some radio commentators obliged, but Italian television refused, for fear that names not given would cause too much distress. People's instinctive reactions are something they look back on uneasily.
My first reaction was get your coat off and get in there and help. And since I thought perhaps I was callous, but I thought, no, you're not going to do anything. You're in an Italian area, and so get out from where you're only going to cause provocation. Do something positive, do something useful. This match cannot be played. The stadium's got to be evacuated. And we have got to get the English supporters out of Brussels as soon as we possibly can, because the Belgians had enough on their hands.
We just stood and watched that and just really couldn't believe it. I say this with a certain amount of shame, but we went back to our professional duties rather than trying to do anything useful to help. People were coming down the pitch, down the running track, and starting to break up the advertising boards to use pieces of wood for their own purposes. And our immediate reaction was we got to look after our stuff. I'm not particularly proud of that, but it was a kind of a professional reaction.
My job was to look after the players and the squad, so I pulled myself back out of it. I'm not saying that to ease my conscience, you know. I walked away from them because I had a job to do. Decision I don't want again. Just don't want that decision again ever. You know.
I stop suddenly and think about my husband and my son at home.
Je me promets qu'en rentrant à la maison,
I promise myself that when I get home I'll hug them both, that I will stop fighting with my husband over who does the housework.
et que je m'arrêterai de me disputer avec mon mari.
What difference does it make if the house is messy?
Qu'est-ce que cela changera s'il y a de la crasse dans la maison ou pas?
Elsewhere in the stadium, reconciliation was not a priority. Revenge was. Juventus supporters from Block Z had sought refuge with the Italian fans at the other end of the stadium. Rumours spread like wildfire and triggered a violent response. The authorities had managed to push back the English fans from Block Z, but they let the situation in the rest of the stadium spiral out of control. The pitch was a battlefield. 60,000 people were wondering what was going to happen next. Officials in the VIP hall had to come up with an answer.
I saw my father and the chief of police come back in from Block Z. We walked across the VIP hall. And then someone shut the door and said, "Right, now we have to decide whether the match goes ahead or not."
Those of us who are directly or indirectly involved were called to this meeting down in the lower part of the main stand. And on the way in there were people, clearly fans, just wandering around. Some of them appeared to be injured, a lot of them dazed. Even in the meeting room where this meeting took place, the decision to go ahead with the game, there were even fans, unidentified people, I remember sitting in the corner there. And nobody really, I think, had the heart to say, get out.
The question was, could they tell 60,000 people to leave and abandon the game out of respect for the dead? British Transport policeman Ian McGregor thought he knew what decision would be made.
I went to Jeddah railway station, and when I got there, there were already some Liverpool Football Club stewards there. They were heartbroken. Some were in tears. It was disbelief. I was expecting within an hour that the stadium would be evacuated and that we'd have coachload after coachload of supporters brought to the station. I couldn't believe, with dead bodies lying around the pitch, that they could play this match.
Horses were sent in, a first and futile attempt to control things. Meanwhile, in the VIP hall where the meeting was taking place, there was mayhem.
As so often happens in discussions when no one's in charge and no one takes the lead, everyone spends their time focusing only on the one thing that's important to them. So I just wanted to tell them to shut up.
The mayor of Brussels didn't know who Mr. De Michaelis was and said to him, "You shut up, or I'll have you arrested."
Brujon was a very intelligent man who'd become the mayor of Brussels after a long career in politics. He enjoyed life a lot. But of course, when he drank, he tended to be out of it. That evening, though I don't like to say it, he was out of it.
They seemed focused only on saying, "It's not our fault, it's not our responsibility."
The Italian minister, I can fully understand he was worried that he'd be criticised for letting the match go ahead. He was afraid of the consequences of the decision that had to be made. Obviously he was moved because the majority of victims were Italian, but more importantly he was the only member of the Italian government there, and he didn't want to end up in trouble.
Everyone was agitated, very agitated. They were all speaking loudly, ignoring one another, and jumping from one conversation to the next.
While organisers and authorities argued, fans and police were in a standoff. Hidden from the cameras, the two teams were waiting in their dressing rooms.
Remember the tunnel just being through there, so you come into the dressing room here, and I was in the corner over here, and there were two benches in the middle. And the first thing that we heard is someone came in our dressing room and said, "Stay in the dressing room because there's something happened." So inquisitive as I am, I go to the door, and that's where all the commotion started, and people coming past. Italians, Scousers crying, saying that there's people that have been killed and, they don't know what to do. And they asked for water, anything, towels. Some people came past, obviously angry, but we were the Liverpool side and started, spitting at us and abusing us. Then we were told, get back in the dressing room.
I remember seeing all these guys coming in riot gear. I remember them coming in, and as quick as they'd come in, they were gone. And it was like, they don't really see that. I mean, and the situation, obviously then you suddenly realise how dire the situation actually was, because I'd never seen riot police at football before, certainly not before the game, and certainly never ever come in through your dressing room. It was like, whoa. But I also remember, I think, still at the same time, one or two of the lads were still playing cards. Almost sort of, no, this isn't really happening, let's just sort of play cards, and when we all wake up, this won't really have happened.
For some people, of course, the situation was all too real. The Ragazzis still hadn't found their cousin, just as others had failed to find an uncle, aunt, brother, sister, father or friend. They could be anywhere, in or around the stadium. The Liverpool manager, Joe Fagan, wearing number 13, had told his players to stay inside, but he went out and talked to the fans. Bodyguard Tony Chin and the Belgian FA official Guido de Vint accompanied him.
He started crying, sobbing. He was saying, please, please, let's have a game, let's enjoy the day. But he couldn't be heard, no one could hear him. The noise was just the volume.
You only saw all the faces, only the eyes, thousands of eyes on you. And he was so... This can't do anything. There was no way of communication.
The powers that be couldn't control the situation. It was just expanding and snowballing.
At the other end of the stadium, the Juventus president Gianpiero Boniperti had to decide what to tell his players.
I didn't want the players to know what had happened in the stands or in Block Z. So I went straight to the coach. I told the coach and the doctor the facts, and I said, don't let anyone in here. Let's lock the door. Let's tell the players it's because they need to concentrate on the game and nothing else.
Boniperti's plan was less than successful. He couldn't prevent the Juventus dressing room being invaded by desperate fans from Block Z looking for a safe haven. Distressed themselves, the players decided to go out and try to calm the Italian crowd.
When you're in the middle of a mob, even if they're your fans, you don't feel that safe. We were trying to get them to behave. Look, there I am in the blue. You could hardly go out and tell the ultras 30 people have died. That would only have made them angrier. So you try to persuade them, to convince them that it's not so bad, that fewer people are involved, that they're injured, not dead.
It was amazing because it was the first time I'd seen them close up. There was just a wire fence between us. But it was awful too. Lots of us told them people have died and they shouldn't play, not under any circumstances.
We, Juventus directors and players, had come out to see what was going on. The fans who'd invaded the pitch came towards us. Some were beaten up, bleeding and crying, saying, "Francesco," that's my name, "Francesco, there are people dead, there's been a tragedy." And then another would say, "Francesco, can I have your autograph?" The contrast between the two was surreal and meant we really couldn't work out what had happened. The contrast was terrible. When I went back into the dressing room, some of the players were sitting head in hands crying. Some were being sick. Some had already taken a shower and were ready to leave. Psychologically, they just went up to playing.
Information was crucial that evening. Even 20 years later, it's difficult to find out exactly who knew what. Police communication records show that half an hour after the tragedy, 16 dead had been counted. An hour later, the death toll had risen to 35. Eventually, that number would increase to 38 on the night itself, and 39 in total. The figures were reported on TV, but the crowd wasn't informed, and back then there were no mobile phones. Beside the dead, 580 people were injured at Heysel, 42 of them seriously. They were taken to at least 9 local hospitals by ambulance, taxi and private car. In their wake were anxious friends and family, desperate for news.
They made me sit down, and a doctor examined me. My lips and my tongue were black, and I couldn't speak. He explained my wife's condition. She was in a coma. The first thing was to bring her out of the coma, and then they'd be able to establish how long her brain had been deprived of oxygen, and whether there was any brain damage. I was alone in this sea of desperate people. People were coming and going, some wounded, others unable to get through to relatives at home in Italy, and people who didn't know how bad their friends' injuries were. I remember an English guy who came in calling the Italians animals. Fortunately for him, one of the hospital doctors took him away quickly.
In the meantime, at the stadium, the ragazzis still hadn't found their cousin Domenico. As a last resort, they headed for the tents put up just outside the VIP hall.
We tried to get near, but the police chased us off because they thought we were looters, trying to steal from the dead. So we told Danilo to go up to the policeman and distract him, and Armando and I went round the back of the tent. We tried to lift the flap up to look at the people inside.
Nel vedere la prima abbiamo guardato subito se c'era dentro Domenico, no? Ma non c'era. Allora ci è venuto su un po' il coso, ho detto magari è vivo ancora. Invece hanno montato un'altra tenda. Nel montare un'altra tenda, lo zio Danilo era già entrato di qua o no? Era già entrato e ha visto che c'era lì dentro. Allora dopo noi ci siamo abbracciati tutti e tre, abbiamo pianto, no? Perché era lì per terra morto.
I recognized him by his shoes. There were a couple of bodies on top of him, but it was him.
Siamo abbracciati e piangevamo tutti.
We all hugged each other and cried. Remember that 20 years ago, I was 21, my brother was 23, and Guido was 26. We were very young and 1,000 kilometers from home.
A 1000 chilometri da casa.
My blood froze.
Alors, avec la police, je commence le travail dégoûtant.
With the police, I start the horrendous job of going through the dead people's pockets to find their passports. We absolutely have to identify each and every body.
Et sur les autres aussi. On entendrait voler une mouche.
I could hear a pin drop. It's as if I'm hearing the hearts beating in all these bodies together.
Battre ensemble.
I start making up stories. When I read a name out loud, I imagine the victim's life. I find a restaurant bill in the pocket of one man. It's from today. You can tell he enjoyed eating. He has a big stomach. Or rather, he had a big stomach.
Ou plutôt, il avait.
I smile. They're not dead. It's just a joke.
C'est une blague.
After about 5 minutes, we decided, come on guys, we need to let someone know that Domenico is dead and we're all okay. We've got to call home. They'll have seen what's happened on TV and will be thinking the worst.
We said, let's go ring on doorbells. There'll be someone who understands us. But no one answered the door to us.
We couldn't call home, so we headed back to the car. But once there, we realized that we didn't have the keys. Who had the car keys? Domenico did, of course, in his pocket. So I waited there by the car, and Danilo and Armando went back.
I couldn't bring myself to go back in, so my brother went, but the police stopped him and told him in their language that he couldn't go in. My brother tried to explain. Keys, car keys. My brother went in, got the keys. I don't know if he kissed Domenico goodbye. He came out with the keys, and then we headed back to the car. They were loading the dead to take them to the morgue.
And so, the ragazzis left for Italy. And still, at the stadium, no decision had been taken, and all logic seemed to have disappeared. It was chaos. Nearly 2 hours after the deaths, the meeting in the VIP hall was still going on.
Then suddenly that Italian minister said in a very loud voice, in French, "But who's running this show? Who's in charge?" Total silence. Then the mayor, who was standing next to me, turned around and pointed to me, saying, "The general." Immediately I told them the game must go ahead. And I added, "You'll have to give me the time to bring in extra troops." They agreed. And so the game went ahead.
It was seen as safer to play than to evacuate. At last a decision had been made, or so it appeared. The Juventus players had been waiting in the dressing room for what seemed like ages, when manager Morini was asked to go to the meeting and find out what was happening.
I arrived and heard our president Boniperti starting to speak. Gentlemen, given what's happened, that people have died, we Juventus are not willing to play. We can't play after what has happened. So I'm taking my team and we're leaving.
In a situation like that, instinct takes over. You think, we just can't play, we should postpone. It's not an easy decision to make.
The Italians in the meeting never really agreed to go ahead with the game, but the others insisted. The final had to be played, for security reasons.
So President Boniperti said, "Okay, if that's what you want to do, we'll play. But is it a real game? Will it count?" And the Liverpool people said, "If we play, we want it to be for real." And the heads of UEFA said, "Yes, whatever the result is, it counts."
I got the impression that the two club presidents, how can I say this, were more concerned with the match result, with who was going to win, than with the tragedy.
Finally, it was decided that the UEFA delegate should go and inform the players that a serious incident had taken place. People had been wounded, but should not tell them that people had died, because many players would refuse to play if they knew that. As the French say, it was a case of raison d'état, reasons of state. The security of the majority took precedence over the personal views of the few.
At 20-10, 2 hours and 10 minutes after the tragedy, the two team captains were asked to talk to the fans, and then the game could go ahead. The speeches didn't make much of an impression. Guido de Vint of the Belgian FA escorted the Liverpool captain Phil Neal to the tannoy.
I left the dressing room with the Liverpool captain. He didn't know anything, he hadn't seen anything, he'd been shut in all evening. We went outside and he was overwhelmed. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a battlefield. He thought there was a war going on. He was so scared that he asked if he could hold my hand.
It was hoped that watching the final would channel the fans' excess energy, especially that of the Italian hardcore fans who were still completely out of control. Back in Italy, Mrs. Martelli kept watching television in the hope of recognizing her son somewhere in the crowd. Once it had been decided to play the final, broadcasters had a new dilemma of whether or not to show it. Most did. German television didn't.
Das ZDF hat sich entschieden, dieses Spiel nicht zu übertragen. Ein Spiel, das, so glaube ich, nur noch einen einzigen Zweck hat, nicht mehr einen Europacup auszuspielen, sondern eine neue schlimme Massenhysterie zu verhindern, die Stimmung, so gut es geht, zu beschwichtigen.
At 10:15, 2 hours and 15 minutes after the collapse of the wall, the two teams came back onto the pitch.
I think if you're brought up in the right way and the chief of police says, actually, you have to do this, I think 99% of the public go, right, we have to do this. I think if we'd been a bit stronger and said, well, actually, no, but if he's saying we've got to play and Juventus are saying they're going to play, then we should play. But I think now you kind of think, well, actually, hold on a minute, that was complete rubbish. We should have just abandoned the game and just gone home.
Yeah, you could have said that. I could have said that I didn't want to play. But then in the consequences, what would have happened to me if that had happened? You are owned by them, so therefore whatever they say, you have to abide by. In today's standards, I could have just said, no, I don't want to play. The youngster who was sitting on the bench at the time, he would have played.
I giocatori non volevano giocare, alcuni. Some of the players didn't want to play, and so Trapattoni and I had to sort of psych them up. We said, look, they're making us play, so we'll play to preserve the honor of the people who have died, to give them a good send-off. They're forcing us to play. We've got to play. Like when there are soldiers in the trenches with bombs falling on them and people being killed, and they have to fight on regardless.
I was very angry. A coiled spring. Ironically, I played the game of my life, maybe because I was so angry and focused. I wanted to prove something to the fans, to win for them. Clearly, if you're going to play, you play to the death, not for the cup itself, but for those fans who died so pointlessly. At least, if they were up in heaven, they would have seen the game.
Alessandro Antonini was waiting for his wife Tiziana to come out of a coma. His best friend didn't know where he was. Fausto assumed Tiziana was seriously injured or dead. He took a cab and went on a desperate search around Brussels, from hospital to hospital.
I was amazed that Franco hadn't called to calm us down. Why was that? Paolo had gone to bed. I went to bed with him to reassure him, but after a while, very quietly, I came back to the phone. The first call, I started by calling his friends at their hotel. I said, please don't leave before you find him, please. They said, Madam, we've already checked all the hospitals. At that point, the stress hit me. I know I passed out. I was aware of them shaking me, and I started to come to. My doctor was there, and our priest, Don Angelo. And then, without any words, no one said a thing. I knew for sure what I had feared from the very start.
Mrs. Martelli's son was probably taken away in one of these ambulances. While the final was being played, the dead were moved from the Red Cross tents just outside the VIP hall to the military hospital. There, 2 cordons of soldiers guarded the dead. The authorities feared that after the game, the news of the deaths would trigger more violence all over the city. Commander Jean-Charles Verlinden was in charge of the morgue.
We thought there was going to be rioting. Tension was running high. We thought people would come to where the dead victims were and might become violent.
Fausto Moschini arrived at the military hospital after he'd tried at least 8 other hospitals. If his friend's wife Tiziana had been brought here, then it was almost certain she was dead.
We had seen people dying in the stadium as a result of violence. We felt that those violent people might come here. Anything was possible. That they would smash down doors, relatives would want to see the dead, that we wouldn't be able to stop them.
I came in down a long corridor and I didn't really know what to expect. They had told me that this was the only place where I might find my friend. There was a gentleman who had brought me down here who had told me, unfortunately we haven't completed the list yet, you'll have to look at them yourself. I assumed there would be 2 or 3 bodies, but when he opened the door, I just saw so many bodies. It was here. I went straight for the smallest body because Tiziana is little. When I got halfway there, I slowed down. I faltered because I was scared. But when I was 2 or 3 meters away, I realized it wasn't Tiziana, but actually a young boy, a 9 or 10-year-old.
In the stadium, the first half ended 0-0. Music was played. 3 hours after the wall in Block Z had collapsed, a list of missing persons was read out over the PA. The head of the stadium workers, Marcel van Biezen, had been helping to compile the list.
I went back to the VIP stand once the game had kicked off, and I ended up next to an Italian supporter who was cheering. I took a closer look at him. Sorry, I'm finding all these memories very emotional. I looked at him and saw that he had no shoes on and was covered in blood, and yet he was cheering on his team. But I was equally surprised by my son, who was in the stand facing the VIP stand. I walked over to find him, and everyone there was watching the game enthusiastically, as if it were a completely normal game. I said to him, "Listen, you need to go home," and he said, No, everything is fine. But you know that people have died here. Yeah, there's a guy just there with the radio who's told us what happened. And yet everybody stayed in that stand, utterly unconcerned, watching the match.
I feel that if a proper announcement had been made saying some of your friends and your colleagues have been very seriously injured, have been killed, as a mark of respect, we cannot play the match. Please will you leave the stadium in a quiet and orderly fashion. I believe that would have happened.
In my opinion, it was essential to play because of the immediate circumstances. But I think it was also important in the longer term to show that the European club competitions were very strong. It was important to retain a sense of continuity, to turn that page in that respect so quickly and show that the game had a strong future.
"13 minutes into the second half of the match, Juventus star player Michel Platini passed to the forward Boniek, who was fouled just outside the penalty area. The referee decided to give Juventus a penalty.
Which way it tackles it? Which way it tackles it? Hit there? 1, 2, 3. Now. Yeah. Outside the area?
Yeah. I thought, well, this is it. They're trying to cheat us on a penalty, yeah, which was never a penalty. I'm going to do my best to stop this because that is just wrong. I got a rush of adrenaline wanting to save this penalty. When Platini, one of the best footballers in the world, steps up and has got a penalty to take against you, you want to do your best. It's him or you. Now you could make a huge name for yourself saving a penalty for Platini.
He didn't. At the hospital where Alessandro was waiting for news, he could hear the cheers from the stadium. If his glasses hadn't been broken during the crush, he could have seen the stadium lights. As it was, he could barely see the taxi arriving with his friend Fausto.
He called over a doctor and told him that he was also a doctor, and they went in. One of the lenses of my glasses was broken, I remember. He came out and said, "Let's go and see your wife." We went into Tiziana's room. He told me that I should squeeze her hand. I did. She opened her eyes and pointed to my broken glasses, asking what had happened to them. This showed that there was no brain damage from the coma.
Non aveva avuto danni al cervello, che era uscito dal coma e quindi
3.5 hours after 38 fans died on the terraces, Juventus beat Liverpool 1-0 and won the European Cup final for the first time in the club's history. Liverpool fans were escorted out of Belgium as quickly as possible. There were no further incidents.
A bit confused of why this was going on. How come they wanted us out of their country so quick? You know what I mean? Why couldn't we go round and have a look round? And then when we got onto the boat and started seeing the images on the television, it was shock. I think shock just hit everyone.
The Juventus fans stayed in the stadium to celebrate the victory with the players.
Look, it's as though we're still all under hypnosis. Look at the fans too. If you'd interviewed them right then, they'd have said, "We're the champions of Europe. We've won the cup. We're the best." And then the following day, why did they play? They shouldn't have. Why did they celebrate? They shouldn't have. That's what football is all about. You go out and play and you forget about everything but football for 90 minutes.
I'd like to compare what happened that night with what happens in war. Neither is pretty. In spite of the deaths and the bloodshed, in the moment of victory, you rejoice because you've taken revenge on your enemy. You're not really thinking clearly. Later, you reflect on all those who've died and you feel respect and grief. But right at that moment, it's just the revenge, as though you're saying, We beat the English after they killed our fans. We've shown them that nothing can defeat us.
Inglesi animali! Bastardi! Assassini!
They go on and on about these so-called hooligans. But really, as individuals, they're no different from us. And all together in a group, running wild, they're just like us too. We're all the same. If anything, we're worse than they are.
We've all, well, not all, but a lot of people, myself included, have got short fuses and can react emotionally rather than thinking about results of reactions. So yeah, as much as I can, I'd never put myself in a position in any walk of life, hopefully, where I'd be involved in any type of conflict, and like to think that I'd be able to walk away from it. That's faith. Left to my own devices, I would probably still be making a lot of wrong choices. I wanted to prove myself, be part of something. But since then, I've realised that it's not about being one of the lads. It's about trying to be nice to people.
1 an et demi après le drame du Heysel, je me suis séparée de mon mari.
A year and a half after the Heysel tragedy, my husband and I separated.
Non, je n'ai pas manqué.
I hadn't failed to do what I'd promised myself. In fact, just the opposite. I tried to explain to him, to make him understand. But he'd never seen death close up. Near the stadium, there's a playing field. A father and son are kicking a ball about. They laugh. They're alive.
Ils rient, ils vivent. My God.
There will be people in Italy now who will forever hold the nose up, to an English person, let alone a Liverpool person.
Absolutely. I know that.
And that's where we lose.
That's where everybody loses. Because if you don't talk about it and get it out in the open and try and understand, then it'll be lost forever. And this is why we are here. I've now come to a place where it happened, and I want to put it just to rest. I won't forget, but at least I've got some answers here.
Yep.
Happy with it, but he's a bit of a perfectionist, isn't he? It's never ending, this boxing job, is it? Where's these two bloody helpers we can't get, Jimmy?
For Roger, there are too many other diversions here, but Jack's soon back on the scene when there's some driving to do. And with a workshop like this, there'll be time to do any repairs that are needed now that it's just over halfway through the tour. And that's a fine manoeuvre. His dad'll be proud of him. There's a lot of interesting places to see round here, so Fred's going to be staying at Ian Howard's for the next few days. While he's here, he's going to be visiting a place where they make wooden patterns that are used for the castings on a traction engine, and the belt-driven workshop of a local clockmaker.
You'll be getting entangled with one of them creatures if you're not careful.
I love you too much.
I love you too.
You don't, that's the problem.
Love's no fun when the traffic's one way. A drama in 3 parts. Patrick Hamilton's 20,000 Streets